Section 1. Chomsky, speaking truth to power. Noam Chomsky. A name synonymous with intellectual rigor and fearless critique. You know the name, right? He's like the intellectual heavyweight champ, a towering figure in the world of academia and beyond. This guy's been calling out injustice and hypocrisy for decades, never shying away from the tough conversations. He's a professor, activist, and author, whose work spans multiple disciplines and has influenced countless minds. Chomsky really made his mark by dissecting U.S. foreign policy, revealing the often hidden motives behind America's actions on the global stage. He doesn't pull any punches, delivering his critiques with a clarity and force that's hard to ignore. One of his most eye-opening books is What Uncle Sam Really Wants, a must-read for anyone interested in understanding U.S. foreign policy. In it, Chomsky lays out some uncomfortable truths, challenging the mainstream narratives we often take for granted. He argues that U.S. foreign policy is driven by self-interest. It's not always pretty, but it's a perspective that demands attention. We're talking about economic domination, where financial power is wielded to maintain global influence. We're talking about strategic control, where military might is used to secure national interests. Chomsky shows how the U.S. government talks a big game about freedom and democracy, but the reality is often more complex. But behind the scenes, it's a different story, one of power plays and strategic alliances. The U.S. has a long history of supporting some pretty nasty regimes, all in the name of national interest. Why? Because those regimes help America get what it wants, whether it's resources, strategic locations, or political leverage. Chomsky's work is even more relevant today, as we navigate a world filled with new challenges and old conflicts. Think about the endless wars in the Middle East, conflicts that seem to have no end in sight. Think about the rise of new superpowers, nations that are challenging the established order. Chomsky helps us understand the forces shaping our world, providing a lens through which we can see the bigger picture. Buckle up, because things are about to get real. The journey through Chomsky's insights is as enlightening as it is challenging. Section 2. Uncle Sam's Real Desires, a look behind the curtain. Let's be honest, folks. The U.S. government isn't exactly known for its transparency. Chomsky argues that Uncle Sam has some hidden motives. It's all about maintaining global power. And how do you maintain power? By controlling resources, markets, and those sweet, sweet trade routes. Think of it like a giant game of Risk, but with real lives at stake. The U.S. wants to be the world's top dog. To do that, it needs to call the shots. That means influencing governments, even if they're not so democratic. Chomsky says the U.S. uses a combination of carrots and sticks. The carrots? Economic aid, military support, and a thumbs up on the world stage. The sticks? Sanctions, regime change, and sometimes good old-fashioned military force. It's a cynical view, no doubt, but Chomsky backs it up with mountains of evidence. He digs deep into declassified documents, historical records, and the pronouncements of policymakers themselves. He connects the dots and exposes the hypocrisy at the heart of U.S. foreign policy. Section 3. Propping up the powerful U.S. support for authoritarian regimes. Here's a hard truth. The U.S. has a long and troubling history of supporting dictators and authoritarian regimes. Why? Because these regimes often play ball with U.S. interests. They might provide access to oil, suppress left-wing movements, or offer a strategic military outpost. Chomsky points to numerous examples of this double standard. He talks about the U.S. backing brutal dictators in Latin America during the Cold War. These dictators might have been terrible for their own people, but they were seen as a bulwark against communism. And it's not just a Cold War phenomenon. Chomsky argues that the U.S. continues to support authoritarian regimes today, especially in the Middle East. As long as these regimes serve U.S. interests, they can get away with murder, literally. This support for dictators has had devastating consequences. It's led to human rights abuses, instability, and blowback against the U.S. Chomsky argues that by propping up these regimes, the U.S. is actually creating more problems than it solves. Section 4. The illusion of freedom manufacturing consent for military intervention. Wars are messy, expensive, and unpopular. So how does the U.S. government convince its citizens to support them? Chomsky argues that it's all about controlling the narrative. The government, often with the help of a compliant media, presents a simplified version of events. Suddenly, complex geopolitical situations are boiled down to good guys versus bad guys. The enemy is demonized, and the U.S. is portrayed as a reluctant hero, forced to intervene to protect freedom and democracy. Chomsky calls this the manufacture of consent. He argues that the media plays a key role in this process. Instead of challenging the government's narrative, the media often amplifies it. They focus on emotional stories, avoid critical analysis, and present the government's perspective as the only legitimate one. Think about the lead-up to the Iraq War. Remember those scary stories about weapons of mass destruction? Chomsky argues that these claims were deliberately exaggerated, if not outright fabricated, to build support for the war. And guess what? No WMDs were ever found. Section 5. From Latin America to Vietnam, Echoes of Intervention. Chomsky doesn't just talk in generalities, he delves deep into the specifics, providing a thorough analysis of U.S. foreign policy. He backs up his arguments with concrete examples from around the world, making his points both compelling and irrefutable. Let's start with Latin America, often referred to as America's backyard. This region has seen numerous interventions by the United States. Chomsky details how the United States has repeatedly intervened in Latin American countries, often with devastating consequences. These interventions were frequently aimed at protecting U.S. economic interests, ensuring that American corporations could operate freely, or to prevent the spread of left-wing governments that might challenge U.S. dominance in the region. He talks about the CIA-backed coup in Chile that overthrew the democratically elected socialist government of Salvador Allende, a pivotal moment in Latin American history. He also discusses the U.S. support for brutal dictatorships in Argentina, which led to widespread human rights abuses. Brazil and Guatemala, where similar patterns of intervention and support for oppressive regimes were evident. These interventions left a legacy of violence, instability, and resentment towards the United States that continues to this day. Then there's Vietnam, another significant chapter in U.S. intervention history. Chomsky was a vocal critic of the Vietnam War, which he saw as a prime example of U.S. imperialism and overreach. He argued that the United States intervened in Vietnam not to protect democracy, but to maintain its geopolitical influence. He argued that the United States intervened in Vietnam not to protect democracy, but to prevent the spread of communism in Southeast Asia, a region of strategic importance during the Cold War. The Vietnam War was a costly disaster for the United States, both in terms of human life and its international reputation, leaving deep scars on the American psyche, both in terms of human life and its international reputation. The war sparked massive protests and a re-evaluation of U.S. foreign policy. Chomsky argues that it's a cautionary tale about the dangers of U.S. interventionism, a lesson that remains relevant today as the world continues to grapple with the consequences of such actions. Section 6. The Middle East Quagmire: Oil, Geopolitics, and the Price of Freedom. The Middle East has been a focal point of U.S. foreign policy for decades, with its vast oil reserves and strategic location making it a region of immense importance. Chomsky argues that U.S. involvement in the region is driven by a complex mix of factors, including oil, geopolitics, and a desire to maintain its position as a global superpower. The control of oil resources is seen as a way to exert influence over other nations. He points to the U.S. support for Israel, often seen as a strategic asset in the region. This alliance is not just about shared values but also about maintaining a foothold in a volatile area. He also discusses the U.S. wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which he argues were driven by a desire to control oil resources and project U.S. power. These conflicts have had long-lasting impacts on both the region and the world. Chomsky is highly critical of the U.S. invasion of Iraq, which he sees as a war of aggression based on false pretenses. The consequences of this invasion have been devastating, leading to widespread destruction and loss of life. He argues that the war destabilized the region, led to the rise of ISIS, and cost countless innocent lives. The power vacuum created by the invasion allowed extremist groups to flourish. He's equally critical of the U.S. drone program, which he sees as a form of extrajudicial killing that often results in civilian casualties. The use of drones has sparked significant controversy and debate over its ethical implications. Chomsky argues that these actions are counterproductive and only serve to fuel anti-American sentiment in the region. The long-term effects of these policies have been detrimental to both regional stability and global perceptions of the U.S. Section 7. Challenging the narrative: Chomsky versus the mainstream media. Chomsky's views on U.S. foreign policy are often at odds with the mainstream media narrative. He argues that the media, whether consciously or unconsciously, often serves as a mouthpiece for the government. He points to the media's coverage of U.S. military interventions, which he says is often biased in favor of the government's perspective. He also criticizes the media's use of language, which he says is often designed to sanitize violence and downplay the human cost of war. Chomsky encourages people to be critical consumers of media. He urges them to question the official narrative, to seek out alternative sources of information and to think for themselves. He believes that a well-informed public is essential for holding the government accountable and for promoting a more just and peaceful world. Section 8. The enduring legacy of Chomsky's critique. Noam Chomsky's work is as relevant today as it was decades ago. His critiques of U.S. foreign policy, his analysis of power, and his call for media literacy continue to resonate with people around the world. Chomsky's work is a reminder that things are not always as they seem. He encourages us to question authority, to challenge the status quo, and to fight for a more just and equitable world. He shows us that even in the face of overwhelming power, one voice can make a difference. His unwavering commitment to truth and justice is an inspiration to us all. Section 9. What do you think? Join the conversation. So what do you think about Chomsky's ideas? Do you agree with his assessment of U.S. foreign policy? How do you think the media shapes our understanding of the world? These are complex issues with no easy answers. But by engaging in thoughtful discussion and debate, we can begin to challenge our assumptions and work towards a better future. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going.